Thank you all. So we have, before we break for lunch, we actually have two special announcements. Please join me in welcoming to the stage John Bryant. John is the chairman of Kellogg since 2014, the president and CEO since 2011. He's been with the company since, I believe, 1998. Is that right?
Correct.
Please, thank you so much for joining us.
You.
As well as Mr. Bey Soo Khiang is the vice chairman of the RGE Group since 2011 and the chairman of the April Group. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Let me start. John, you have an announcement to make on behalf of Kellogg.
Yes, I do. Thank you. It's an honor to be here today. It's good to have an opportunity to talk about agriculture, for those who've been hearing about oil and gas and energy this morning. The environment, sustainability, absolutely critical for a company like the Kellogg Company. 3 reasons. 1, it's in our DNA. Mr. Kellogg was a great philanthropist, conservationist. He gave away virtually all of his wealth, creating one of the largest charities in the world, the Kellogg Foundation, which is still the single largest shareholder of the Kellogg Company. Secondly, consumers. There is a generational shift occurring out there in the marketplace. Millennials in the US are passionate about where their food comes from, how it's being handled, how it's being treated. Baby boomers have always cared as well, but the level of intensity of passion amongst millennials is at a higher level still. That's true not just in the US, but across the developed world. And then thirdly, if you're a food company and you're doing an enterprise risk management assessment of what's the challenges, what are the risks to your business, the impact of climate shocks to the supply chain is significant. So there's a possibility not just for the price of grains to go up, but the very availability of those grains to be put at risk. A few years ago, we saw food riots in Cairo. The Egyptian government closed their border to the exportation of rice, and companies like Kellogg was using that rice to make Rice Krispies here in Europe. And so there's the supply chain is very fragile. So what are we doing as a company? If you were to go back 3 or 4 years ago, you'd see the sort of sustainability commitments from Kellogg that you'd expect to see. Within the 4 walls of our company, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, water, waste, etc. Over the last few years, we've extended that to an end-to-end supply chain responsibility. And as part of that commitment, we're working with 500,000 farmers around the world to adopt climate-smart agricultural practices. An example of those practices might look like, in India, we're working with CARE, with corn growers, to plant alternative crops between the rows of corn. That actually improves the productivity of corn by 20%, improves the biodiversity of the soil, and provides an additional cash crop for farmers. So a significant improvement in the stability of that supply chain. We also recognize that when severe climate changes occur, severe weather patterns occur, the people who are impacted the most are the ones that don't have the resources to look after themselves. And so we're committed to giving 1 billion servings of food away by 2016. We made that commitment about 1.5 years ago, and we've already met that commitment as a company. So we also have a role in hunger, getting food to people who need it the most when they need it the most. But what's been interesting over the last few days being at this summit is a number of people have said that business has not been as present as it's needed to be in past summits. And so as a company, as we thought about coming into this environment, we wanted to make a commitment that was similar in nature and scope to a lot of the country commitments are, like our own INDC. So we've set ourselves the aggressive goal that by 2050, we will reduce the greenhouse gas emissions within the 4 walls of our company by 65%. And by 2050, we'll reduce the greenhouse gas emissions across the end-to-end supply chain by 50%. Now, a couple of observations on that commitment. First, accountability. Obviously, we will measure ourselves and track our progress on an annual basis with clear 5-year milestones. Secondly, it's really a double-barreled commitment. As we sit here today, we don't know exactly how we're going to get there. We're going to need to work with partners up and down our supply chain. We need new technology to help us invest back in our plants to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions as well as back on the farms. But the second element is we're absolutely committed to making it. So if you look around the world today, we're seeing a generational shift. We're seeing a generational shift amongst consumers and their belief and their passion in sustainability and where their food comes from. As part of that, business must and will step up to protect our planet. And that's the basis of our commitment today from the Kellogg Company.
Thank you. And let me ask you, feel free to applaud. And didn't mean to cut everyone off. John, let me ask a question. The 15% commitment on greenhouse gases through your supply chain, which is a significant commitment because you're dealing with agriculturals, you're dealing with suppliers who oftentimes are immune from these changes and immune from pressure. How do you see, what is the greatest challenge? What are the carrots and sticks that you are going to offer in order to drive those changes through your supply chain?
If you look at obviously the 65% commitment within our four walls, we can see how not all the way we get there, but clearly investing in things like solar, et cetera, within the plants will help us make progress there. The end-to-end supply chain is the more challenging one. That's the 50% greenhouse gas emission reduction. The single largest source of greenhouse gases in our supply chain is actually the production of grains itself. So take rice. Rice production creates a lot of methane gas, particularly if you're using wet rice production. But working with institutions like the International Rice Research Institute, which is pioneering rice growing programs from wet to dry rice production has a significantly lower methane gas emission. So if we can continue to find these new farming approaches and share them throughout the farming network, we can make tremendous progress. It is surprising today how much we know about agriculture, but yet how large the gap is between our knowledge and the practice in the field. An opportunity to share those practices and drive those practices. And as a purchaser of those grains, we are somewhat uniquely positioned to work with our farmers and work with our supply chain and pull that through the system.
That's interesting. Well, thank you so much.
Sure.
Mr. Bey, let me open it up to you. You also have an announcement on behalf of the April Group.
Well, thank you, Charles. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm here to share with you how APRA, a pulp and paper company based in Indonesia, has taken many small steps on a journey towards a low-carbon future that is built around the 5 C's model. That is, if we focus on doing what is good for the community, what is good for the country, what is good for conservation and climate, then the outcome will be good for the company. APRA began the journey in the year 2000 by contributing 40,000 hectares of forest to add to a national park in Riau, Indonesia. Regrettably, the national park is now 85% deforested due to illegal encroachment and land grabs by burning and replanting of palm oil. The painful lesson for us is that in Indonesia, if you cannot manage and control access to the forests and provide jobs for the local community, then the forest will be illegally encroached and burnt. In 2005, APRA started conserving the high conservation value forests, HCVF, within our concession and reforesting the degraded forests into plantations. Where it was possible, we created a ring of plantations around these HCVFs, which essentially acts as a security buffer against illegal encroachment. Since 2005, we have protected and conserved 250,000 hectares of HCVFs. In the process, APRA created 90,000 jobs for the communities in the region and alleviated poverty in the rural areas of Riau, Sumatra. In 2013, we moved from conservation to restoration by acquiring 20,000 hectares of degraded peatland forests and started restoration work in these areas under the Riau Ecosystem Restoration. Fauna and Flora International has been assisting APRA in the community carbon and biodiversity assessment on the ground. And Bidara, a local NGO, has been helping us with the community engagement. In 2014, we made another very important new commitment to conserve 1 hectare of HCVF for every hectare of forest plantation that we have. We call this our 1-to-1 commitment. RER was expanded to 40,000 hectares. In June 2015, APRA strengthened its sustainable forest management policy to version 2.0. Besides a categorical commitment to ensure that there's no deforestation in our supply chain, we also expanded the RER to 70,000 hectares. Today, I'm here to tell you that we are taking another major concrete step towards a low-carbon future. First, we are doubling the area protected under the eco-restoration from 70,000 hectares to a total of 150,000 hectares. This essentially brings most of the sensitive carbon-rich peat dome in the core of Kampar Peninsula under restoration. Plus the 250,000 hectares of HCVF, the total of 400,000 hectares of conservation and restoration managed by APRA will take us closer to fulfilling our one-to-one commitment as we have 480,000 hectares of plantation. Second, we are making a significant investment of US $100 million over the next decade to ensure that our conservation and restoration activities in APRA will continue unabated throughout the ups and downs of the business cycles. We are confident that we can protect, conserve, and restore the Kampar core because it's surrounded by a ring of plantation that helps buffer against illegal encroachment and burning. In fact, throughout the recent El Nino season, which is worse than the severe one in 1997, there was hardly any hotspots in these peatland areas. We believe that when we manage the water levels of the whole peninsula on a landscape basis to keep the peat wet during the dry season, we can keep the peatland from burning and emitting large amount of carbon into the atmosphere. Prevention of fires in this area was further strengthened when we engaged 9 villages in the area under the Fire-Free Village program, which essentially educates the villagers on the hazards of the haze from fires, provide them an alternative for land clearing to plant their crops, and finally reward the villagers with cash incentives for community projects if they are fire-free. Ladies and gentlemen, in Indonesia, the ring plantation approach and the engagement of local community has enabled us to protect, manage, conserve, and restore the ecosystem, ensure the viability of our plantations, and promote local and social development. We believe that this landscape approach will help us meet the sustainable development goals and contribute to Indonesia's climate goals. Needless to say, this latest major step will not be the last, as APRA will continue to proactively seek sustainable solutions to make the challenges for a lower carbon and inclusive future for all. Thank you.
Please thank me in thanking both of our guests.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bey. Thank you so much. I think one of the things that we're seeing is that companies, much like nations, are coming up with guidelines and with commitments that exceed what is required of them. And thank you so much for joining us today to make your very important announcements. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break.